What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We got another episode of The Strange Road. I'm your host, Mikey. Of course, always with me is Bub, riding shotgun tonight.
How's it going?
Tonight we have Stoner. A little lonely back there in Master Control. No
Stoner the Loner.
No Stoner the Loner. No Sir Bro of Diz. But we got it all under control. Diz Bro set us up for success tonight with all the audio, so everything's going to be looking and sounding good like always.
And for anybody that doesn't know or hasn't watched the show before, his real name is Stoner, his last name.
Yes. The Wizard.
Sometimes draws
it's the Wizard.
a funny look.
It's Stoner. It's
but he's the Wizard in Master Control, but today he is the Loner Stoner.
The Loner Stoner. I love it.
Yeah.
Always, guys, thank you for showing up and hanging out in the chat.
Absolutely.
Anybody that's watching live,
we appreciate
We see all you guys in there. Stoner's dad, what's going on? Born Not to Run, Flutz Capacitor, Necro, Justin Lamb, we see you. What's happening, everybody? Backyard TV, welcome.
Heck yeah.
This is going to be a great episode. Super, super stoked. I've been saying, it's the wheelhouse of the Strange Road.
Yeah.
So, and me personally, like my interests overall, being from Ohio, we have similar stories that what we're going to hear from a completely different location.
Yeah.
Tonight we have Heather L. Arnold, and she's an author, researcher, and she's been digging into giants in Aruba for many years. You can see her on a lot of different podcasts. She has a Substack. Please go in the description, check out all of her stuff, follow her. And, this kind of information, the Facebook groups and the Facebook page are full of images and links, different articles videos, and links. So go check that out. I want to bring in Heather right now. Heather, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for being here. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we were talking earlier, right before we started, she was having some issues. So just FYI, she's in you said the high wind season of where you're located, right? So it's not uncommon. Maybe that comes through and kind of knocks out the signal. So if we have a pause, just bear with us. But I think it'll be worth the wait.
Right.
So Aruba, how did you make your way down there and start researching giants? Well, how did that connect?
Yeah, it's a crazy story. So I came down here on vacation in 2005, and I ended up breaking my back during a rock climbing incident. It's crazy. So I fell and broke my back in two places, and I realized that I couldn't do my job anymore. I was living in Manhattan. At that time, I was a pharmaceutical rep. I lived on in a four-story walk-up building.
Yeah.
So my whole life was physically, it was necessary for me to physically be walking and active. And so once I broke my back, I realized, wow, I can't live in the city, in New York City anymore. I've got to make a major move. And so I decided to move down to Aruba. So I packed up everything I had, and donated everything else and came down to Aruba. And through a series of events, I met some Arubans, one of them being my daughter's father. And we decided to start a tour company. So I was laid up for over a year. I wasn't really able to walk much or move about freely due to my injuries. So I did a business plan, and I worked on a business plan for a tour company. I wanted it to be tours that were very different from anything available on the island. So I focused on private Jeep tours and Harley Davidson rentals and tours. And my other component of the tours that I wanted them to be historically accurate. And through my research of Aruba and the ABC Islands, which are Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao, they're rather close together. You could actually take a boat to them, and all three actually share the history of the giants. But so I did research and looked online, and I really couldn't find anything. It was very strange. And so then I stumbled across an archaeologist who I'm now actually very close friends with, who's here on the island. He's the head of archaeology for the Archaeology Museum, giving a talk. And in the talk, it was a video of a talk he had done, I believe it was in Aruba, on what they were calling the 500-year birthday of Aruba. And he took umbrage with that, saying, there were people here 5,000 years ago. Why are we saying Aruba is only 500 years old? And it's going on, which I actually agreed with. But then he started saying, and then I kind of zoned out and then zoned back in when he started going off on saying there are no giants in Aruba. There were never any giants in Aruba. And I thought, what is he talking about? No one's even saying anything about giants. And he just starts going off about giants. And then I thought, wow, there must have been giants in Aruba.
Yes.
So he's got the same.
I'm living a parallel life with you in this
same
moment.
correlatory story of how did you guys get into the giants that time at Serpent Mound?
I can tell the story real quick.
Yeah.
Fort Hill is another ancient earthwork site up on this amazing hill. It's really trippy place. But me and my wife, when she was right before we had our first child, we went on a hike, get some exercise, take a tour of Fort Hill.
Right.
There's a park ranger up there at the top. They're giving us this tour. And then he says to the group, you guys, yeah, well, I got some really interesting information if you guys want to hear about it. And we're like, yeah. And he's like, well, I probably shouldn't. This is a Ohio,
it's hush
Ohio History Connection,
you're not allowed to talk about
sponsored tour.
Right.
And so he's like, no, I better not. So me and my wife were like, what is going on here? Bro, you're doing this to the wrong guy.
Make up your mind.
So we finished this other park ranger comes up because it's a long tour. It's a big property.
Right.
And so this other guy comes up and he relieves the park ranger of his duty. He goes back down to the parking lot and we continue the tour. We get down to the parking lot at the end of the tour. My wife walks right up to him. He's down there. Hey, what were you talking about up on that? You got to tell us. You can't just leave us hanging, man. He's like, all right, well, it's just us. Well, have you guys ever heard about the Nephilim? The giants? And it's like, or he said, have you ever heard about the Nephilim in Ohio? A lot of people think that there's legends that there were giants here. And it's
very suppressed if that's
from the Bible.
Yeah.
The Nephilim is what the word he used. And I said, hold on a second. How have I never heard about this? I mean, this is in 2013 and I had just started tapping into all the earthworks and figuring out what they were all about. And, we had Serpent Mound, but I thought that was kind of a one-off.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how many earthworks, and they were geometrically perfect and mathematically perfect and aligned to everything. And so he told us, look into this. There's a lot of people researching this stuff. And I just shocked that I'd never heard about this. And I'm into this kind of stuff.
Right.
So again,
but the unprovoked nature of going, in her instance of him, saying, don't even ask about giants. There were never giants.
And Brad Lepper does the same thing.
Who starts doing
the Ohio
that?
History Connection archaeologist here in Ohio.
That's like a Freudian slip of there are giants. Don't ask about the giants. P.S. There's giants.
Yeah. Continue.
Yeah, that's one
major parallel.
That's why I began to research them, because I thought that's so strange, because no one ever said in this whole talk, bringing up giants, and all of a sudden he's going off and almost unhinged about there's, no giant, don't even look over there. There was nothing to see.
Wow.
So then I began to really dig in, because now I had a direction to go. And then it began to become clear to me why this was being suppressed. Not necessarily why, but why it was more of a challenge for me to find out the true history of Aruba. And so then I came across Amerigo Vespucci's letters that he wrote when he first stepped foot in Aruba. And then I discovered that he wrote a very detailed analysis of what he came across when he first came to Aruba in 1499. And it was due to his interactions with the giants in Aruba that he called the island of the giants. And in the Juan de la Cosa 1502 Mappus Mundi, which is considered the first map of the New World, he almost perfectly puts Aruba on the map, but doesn't call it Aruba, calls it the Island of the Giants. And he also makes note of Curaçao as well. So it's Aruba and Curaçao that are considered the islands of the Giants. Later, Bonaire would become a part of that as well. But I think because the islands, geographically speaking, first comes Aruba, then Curaçao, and then Bonaire. Gotcha. I think they just didn't get to Bonaire at that point by the time that the map was done. But by 1508, for sure, they knew about Bonaire because it's written in documents. Those 3 islands were under the jurisdiction of Spanish rule based off of the mainland, which is now Venezuela. And they were named as the Islands of the Giants. So, that was the first beginnings of me realizing, wow, there really is a history of giants on the island. And once I dug deeper and deeper, read Vespucci's notes, which were very, very detailed, very clear, very concise. I mean, Vespucci wasn't, one of the arguments they'll say, though, the Vespucci and the other explorers, they were trying to sell books. So they just made up these fantastical stories to sell books. Well, I mean, that could have been the case, but I don't think these men who were responsible for all this, what was considered at that time high technology, some of the smartest people, some of the most prestigious people, advanced people, he brought over with him on the ship, doctors, people who were experts in medicine, almost like a modern day pharmacist, people who were experts in flora, fauna, birds in particular. He was jotting down everything that he was seeing, what they were wearing, what they were eating, what they looked like.
So it's a real research expedition. It's not, just out there with, maybe he has a journal and he's, he's detailing.
I mean, look at Magellan's account from Patagonia.
Right.
Well detailed.
Tried to bring back one
with
them. They
sketched the giant with all of them next to him.
Tried to take him with them.
Nabbed that giant.
And they died in transit.
He died in transit. They never, the rotting corpse on a boat, they probably just kicked it off, on their way back to wherever they were going.
Sounds like a rough ride.
And, DeSoto coming up from Louisiana and coming up into the Americas and seeing live giants in the 1500s.
That was going to be my question to her was what's the accepted reasoning behind it being called the Island of Giants?
Skeletons. These are accounts of actual living giants.
I know,
right?
but I'm trying to figure out, is there crazy. Here's the official why we call it the Island of Giants. There was some, mythological story or something that, like you're saying, it's just to draw people in, but from the accounts of the researcher down there, that doesn't seem to jive with their work ethic. So
right. So that's a good question. So the reason why he called it the Islands of Giants, and he specifically tells you why in Vespucci's letters. It's his first letter of his second voyage. He writes, it's in a book. It's an excellent book if anyone's into it and very into history. It's called Letters from the New World.
Oh, cool.
And he writes about how he came to Aruba, but not calling it Aruba, but the mainland. Originally what occurred was Columbus was over here first, actually the mainland northern South American coastline. And he didn't have time to come to Aruba, but I'm positive the mainland, which I would consider them probably Arawak, the people of which is now Venezuela, told Columbus that there was gold in Aruba, which there is. So I'm sure that was one of the beginning intrigues of coming to Aruba. So when Columbus went back to Europe, he communicated this information, and he lost his permit, so to speak, to come back here again, which he was originally intended to do. Okay. It was, some people say it was absconded by Amerigo Vespucci, because he married into the Medici family and accused Columbus of embezzling money. And so Vespucci then got the gig. So
100%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's actually. I think that I would love to even just write a book on that.
Right. I was about
that
to say this needs to be like an HBO Game of Thrones or Showtime.
You don't play with the Medici. They're the black. Yeah. That's the black nobility, dude.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the black nobility. The black.
They were financing these. All the ships.
Okay.
So, when they came over, then they immediately wanted to come to what is now Aruba. So they came over on a boat, and they first saw, kind of like Magellan did as well, large footprints in the sand.
Okay.
And that's when they were intrigued. So they began to follow the footprints, and they were met by 7 women. And Vespucci mentions each of them were taller than if they were kneeling and we were standing, they would still be taller than us. And so, and these were just the women. And he surmised that one was probably a grandmother, one was probably a mother, and then there were teenage girls. And similar to what you were talking about earlier about taking one of the giants and bringing them on the ship as Magellan did, that's exactly what the plan that they began to concoct is taking one of the teenage girls and bringing her back on the ship.
Oh, so wild.
It's kind of, I think, the modus operandi, these treasures of their journeys.
Right.
Sadly, some of them were human.
Yeah.
And so when they're trying to concoct this plan, the 36 men come into the village. And by the way, Vespucci details what the women look like and what their village was like. And they had a huge communication problem, and they couldn't communicate on any level. And these 36 men come in. Vespucci is terrified, as are the men, and the men in his group, not the giants. And the giants all have these strange weapons that Vespucci had never seen before, and he was terrified of. He couldn't even figure out how they were lifting the weapons that they had. He was trying to figure out, what would that weapon be for? What would that weapon be for? And then they suddenly realized maybe they should abort mission and not try to steal the teenage girls and just head back to the ship. So they quickly turn around, reverse course, and try to get back to the ship as quickly as possible. And the giants are steps behind them, not letting them out of their sight. And they're terrified. And just to give you some context, Vespucci, the island he was at before he had reached Aruba, was again off the coast of South America, the northern coast. And he had witnessed cannibals with a human on a spit being cooked.
Good God.
And he was more terrified of these giants than he was of the cannibals. And so the giants were following them, pacing them right back to the ship, even going into the water as they're trying to board the ship.
Oh, God.
Vespucci and the men were so scared that they began to fire off their cannons. And he says not to hurt them, but as to scare them and have them retreat. And then he states, I thought I was going to die that day. That was the most fear I had ever felt. And he said, I named these islands the islands of the giants due to the large stature of the people there. So he specifically tells you why he named them the island of the giants.
And people push back on this. Why? This, to me, is a very, very detailed account of a pretty reliable explorer.
Right.
I mean, come on. How many people do you got? Magellan, you got, it's...
Their work only counts when we want it to count.
I mean, this is De Soto. They all wrote about this, in that, and they had the Spanish church, friars and people from the church that would write down accounts as well.
Right.
I mean, wow. That is such a detailed account.
You mentioned people of the church in 1508. Pedro the Martyr, his name was. He was the head. I guess he was a representative of the Vatican in Granada, on the island of Granada, and he had heard about the giants in Aruba, what is now Aruba, and he wanted to show proof of the giants to the Vatican. So he somehow was able to acquire a femur of skeletal remains of the giants here in Aruba. And he sent it with someone on a ship to go back to the Vatican so it could be presented. And it never made it to the Vatican, the femur, and no one knows whatever happened to it again. So there was an attempt by the Catholic Church, the Vatican, to preserve this knowledge, and sadly, I'm positive it was stolen. I would think. I don't think there's really any other way to look at it other than that. But
my. Or don't these stories just repeat over and over? Whether it's the Smithsonian or the Vatican,
even if it made it to the Vatican,
how many times do we have a priceless artifact or proof?
They have lots of them right now.
Hey, guess what? It's lost in transit, lost in shipping.
They have hundreds of thousands of them right now.
Yeah. Oh, that bone's in the Vatican.
Even if it got to the Vatican, we're never going to know.
Yeah. Right.
It's a repository. It is a repository of information that is invaluable, and I don't know what it takes to get in there, but you have to have some credentials.
Do they rebuke Vespucci's story? What do they say about this account? I would love to know the excuse.
Right. What's the other side of the coin?
Well, in the beginning of the researchers, and I'm talking about maybe in the late 1800s or early 1900s, when the first archaeological expeditions and excavations occurred of the giant burials, there was a lot of them trying to just basically say that what Vespucci was saying was hyperbole, and tried to discredit what he was saying.
Right.
And then in 1970, there was an independent researcher who happened to be also very wealthy named Christopher Engels, and he was convinced in Vespucci being accurate. And he was the first person to unearth and put on display some giant remains that he had uncovered at the largest cemetery here on the island called the Malmuk Cemetery, where as of today, at least 79 burials have been unearthed.
Wow.
But there are more, but they just stopped uncovering the burials because it was just so expansive.
Right.
And now the site is actually protected and there's no building that can go on there or anything.
Good.
But
that's good.
He actually had unearthed 2 skulls, and he couldn't find anyone to research them and look at them and in a scientific way until he finally found this woman who was the head of the Tropical Museum, which is still in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, to this day. And she flew over to actually Curaçao and looked at the skulls and did an analysis, a detailed scientific analysis, and determined that the skulls were the largest skulls she had ever seen. One of the skulls actually still had its hand fused to its skull because they were put in almost like
like playing on your hands like this.
Right. With their legs curled.
Sure.
Right.
Almost,
like a fetal position.
Fetal position.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the hand was still fused to the side of the skull, and her analysis of that hand was that it was the largest hand she had ever seen. And she said, "There's no humans alive that I can compare the size of these people to, other than this one tribe of Native Americans from Florida that she mentions." But she still says she believes that their stature in Aruba were much larger in terms of width and entire size, not just height, but also width, and their bones were thicker. And then, so those skulls were actually on display for some time in the Curaçao Museum, and you'll love this. So when I called them, the curator of the museum, to ask about the skulls, I was told that the museum had recently gone through a renovation, and these skulls disappeared.
I knew you were going to say that. God,
skulls aren't there anymore. I mean, it's just so upsetting.
Can we just pause for my head to
of Oz going missing and being lost in a storage unit, like, pardon me, but crap like that, where it's like very important
shit like that,
important things like that, not just something small.
Let's just pause for a second while my head explodes.
It's the ruby slippers.
This makes me angry because when you start digging into this, same stories over and over again in Ohio. Miamisburg Mound, they uncovered a 9-footer. You know, these giant swords, these copper gorgets. The artwork is fantastic. The artistry, the advancement, that they put them on display at the damn town hall. And then the Smithsonian comes in, writes a whole article how, yes, we came here and studied these giant skeletons while we took the bones.
Time and time again.
The townspeople, the mayor, constantly contacting the Smithsonian going, where's the bones?
Right.
You came here and took our...
it's the highest level of authority with the highest amount of incompetency.
Well,
right?
That too.
Like, it's the official, keepers of the truth and the history, and they show up and they're like Mr. Magoo or like Mr. Bean. They like destroy something and they're like, oh well, sorry guys, we had it. Shucks, we'll have to get one more.
But then the next generation, the problem is that the next generation of the people that are part of these institutions go by the same narrative that the person before them was told. That the person before them was told.
But that's what you just said. The
and
narrative.
You don't
the
question
story, the filtration,
the
of that
academic. The basically the view or what this is our stance from the Bureau of Ethnology and the Smithsonian and the formation John Wesley Powell.
Yep,
they're moving forward. There are no giants, like you said. There are no giants. We will not discuss giants. And from then on, I mean, that's the 1800s already. They had made their mind up. We're not talking about giants. So if you have a young, eager anthropologist, archaeologist that uncovers giant skeletons, guess what? You're not talking about it. You're not writing a paper about it. You're going to be discredited. You're going to be written in the newspapers. You're going to be written publications that are going to totally ruin your life.
Our guest that wouldn't say that she had Bigfoot encounters during her whole career where she was in the government because she's like, I can't.
Yep.
There's a lot of people walking around that probably have these kind of stories, but just cannot.
Information.
So maybe that lid will keep lifting as people either exit those, lines of work or professions, and they are able to speak on it. But yeah, it just seems like time and time again, those that should take care of something and have it on display for the record keeping.
Gatekeepers, man.
Yeah,
I'm sick of these gatekeepers more than anything. It's like, you find out about this completely being them showing up and taking this away. So every time you stumble across something like that, does it just infuriate you, or does it make you want to keep going and going because you feel like you're getting closer to the truth? Well, if they're trying to hide this, I'm onto something.
You're over the target. Yeah.
Well, I am working on repatriating the skulls because they should be in Aruba, but I can't find them. I even called University of Leiden to try to see if they were there. Now, they were written about in the Reading Eagle in 1980. A journalist actually came to Curaçao, to the Curaçao Museum, which is still here in Curaçao, and tried to and went to see the museum and wrote up a whole article about how wonderful the museum was. And then she briefly mentions how in the basement of the museum are 2 skulls of a giant race of people who lived on the islands. And these are the skulls of the giants, and they were considered to be over 8 feet tall. So she doesn't have any pictures, but she does have the description and what they said next to the skulls.
Right.
But I will tell you something positive, though, that's actually very important and so sadly overlooked. In 1980, in the island of Bonaire, which is part of the ABC Islands, they were building a bus stop, and they uncovered a giant skeleton, and they gave it over to the archaeologists who did research on it. And at the conclusion, the archaeological report is called the Bonaire skeleton. And the conclusion of the investigators was that and literally it's stated in the conclusion by the archaeologist that Vespucci has been vindicated, that this skeleton proves that there were, in fact, giants in the ABC Islands, and that this skeleton was definitely of giant stature. And that skeleton, as of 2019, when I saw it, is still in a private archaeology museum in Bonaire, in the capital. capital. And so it is a small museum that's sometimes open, sometimes not. It's crumpled up in a little pile in a box in a corner of a very cluttered room. And it's this giant skeleton, this enormous skull. Another facet of the giants here are that their skulls were elongated. So it's this giant elongated skull.
The whole skeleton. How tall? Sorry to stop you, but when we say giant, like
she said 8 foot.
So they're estimating that this giant could have been 8 foot or more. This particular skeletal remains.
I think now that qualifies as a giant.
And but also the way they figure out how tall the skeletons, first of all, shrink, especially this one. They're estimating that it could have been about 800 years old
because of the discs and everything in the spine go away. And
I think just also just the way that skeletons generally decompose, not in the decomposition process, also in this climate too, which we're in a semi-arid region. So because of the degradation of the actual measurements of the skeletal remains anywhere globally, height is determined by a mathematical equation. So it really isn't determined by measuring the bones, using that as a guideline in a sense, but then they extrapolate out using a mathematical equation. So they show you in the archaeological report how they plugged in numbers to come up with it, and their most conservative numbers that they put in the equation came up with a little over 8 feet tall. So it was the conclusion of the investigators that even though those were the numbers that came out of the equation, that they believed that the skeleton was actually taller in life than 8 feet tall.
That's wow. That's tall.
So if you ever go to Bonaire, and that's one of my first trips I'm going to do. I just recently moved to Aruba 5 months ago, but my first trip will be to go back to Bonaire and to see if the skeleton is still there. The museum has acquired a new owner, so that makes me a little nervous. And I haven't met anyone who's seen the skeleton. I don't even think most people go to this museum because you don't even realize, and there's so many millions of other things to do in Bonaire. People they overlook this museum, but it's actually one of the best museums I've ever been to in the Caribbean and has so many amazing artifacts. But it's sometimes it's by appointment only. And so I'm hopeful to be able to give an update as soon as I get back to Bonaire.
Nice. Yeah, you're definitely making me
blow up the spot.
Aruba on my destination list.
We got to blow up that museum. Let people know about that museum.
I would love to go down there. Maybe not during windy season. Maybe I'll go when it's a little bit more chill on the wind. But
good idea.
You talk about the elongated skulls. It reminds me of Paracas. The Peruvian, the Chilean, the Atacama Desert. And down there is kind of where you find these elongated skulls. Some of them have red hair that you can still see on the skulls. Is that what we're in close to relationship? Is that, to me, that seems right in line with Caracas and Peru and all those places down there.
Yes, well, I've seen some of the Paracas skulls in Lima Archaeology Museum in Peru, and the elongation of those, and I'm not quite sure they were giants, at least not the skulls that I saw, unless they had little skulls, really big bodies. I only saw skulls, but they didn't appear, although the skull did appear large and highly bizarre looking because it's elongated so greatly. I mean, it's clear as day. It's no denying it. The elongation of the Paracas skulls was up like a cone head. But the elongation of the giants here in the Caribbean was up and back. So it was an elongation that put a large part of the weight of the brain case towards the back of the skull. So they had very high foreheads, but then their skulls went back, kind of like Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Nina, how they had those very Nefertiti, even those long, the elongation was up the high forehead, and then further back it was elongated. And this was this anatomical difference is accompanied by a different location where the neck connects to the skull to accommodate for this massive amount of weight of the brain at the back of the skull. So everything's a little shifted. The eye sockets, where the ears are, where the skull connects to the neck, and also the jaw. So there were definitely anatomical differences in the elongation of the giants here and the Paracas giants, or the Paracas elongated skull people as well. So there could be, there are researchers who say that perhaps the first group were the elongated skulls of Paracas people, and then these hybrid elongated skull people came about, such as the giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao, and that's why they have this different elongation. And that's something that should be researched further, I think, because that actually could make sense. I don't know what the hybridization would be, the Paracas with someone else. I'm not quite sure what that other species would be, but it definitely is an interesting topic to explore further.
Yeah. What is the storyline of, so we have the story of the giants. Where do they go from there? What's the history line of that civilization or culture? What, even finding the remains and the burials, did they just have a dying off of the culture or the species itself? Was there a war? Does anybody know what happened to them or where they went?
Well, interestingly, in the early 2000s and 2003, there were a series of scientists who came to Aruba to do a genetic analysis of the local Aruban population. And one of the qualifications to be a part of this scientific research was that you had to be an Aruban that had several generations going back who were in Aruba, that you didn't come from Dominican Republic, or you didn't come from Europe, or something, that you really had your roots in Aruba. And they came up with a pool of people and did a mitochondrial analysis, mitochondrial DNA analysis, and they determined that the modern people of Aruba retain a large percentage of this ancient archaic DNA that they presumed is from the archaic giants of Aruba, the archaic people. So what I think occurred, not far from where I sit, I can look out my window and stare at this ancient cave site. And this site houses what I think is a birthing chamber. Firstly, because it's so almost impossible to get to. It's just one of the craziest hikes you'll ever do. You actually have to go climb up using a vine at some point. And once you get there, there's a petroglyph of a pregnant woman. And she's a woman who has a shroud on and then has a baby in her womb. And then there are tick marks on the wall. And there aren't many tick marks. And I believe that those tick marks are births. So if you look and see that there weren't a lot of births of giants, probably because of the anatomical peculiarities of an elongated skull and giving birth to babies with elongated skulls. Obviously, the primitive nature of it all, having it occur in a cave. So these, although they were probably the elite ruling class, the dominant people of society, they probably started to eventually die out. And what I believe to be the case, and what the mitochondrial DNA kind of shows, is that there were average statured people here at the same time as the giants, and they were probably being ruled over by the giants. And at some point, in order to preserve their species, they began to mate with the average statured people. And then that's what I believe happened to the giants. They just mated themselves out, and out of a desire to survive.
Absolutely. And if you look back through really ancient accounts, you have like the people that were 32 foot tall or 18 foot tall. And it seems like the further back you go, when you're talking about the King's List of Egypt or the Sumerian King's List, I mean, they show the carvings and the cartouches of these little people, fully grown people sitting on the knees of the gods.
Yeah.
And they're just like 40 feet tall.
Yeah.
So, you know, as you kind of, your civilization decays, I would imagine that these folks just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller until there's no breeding population and they're kind of run out.
Well, and again, think about our memory, how short term we are of like, we can't imagine 100 years ago.
I mean, we're barely a country.
We can't imagine the 1800s in the Old West right now.
Right.
So we can't do it. A lot of people can't. But if you can really kind of dial your mind and go, you know what, if you crank this back this amount of million years ago, there were dinosaurs here. And if you crank it back, it could have been. But a lot of people just,
I'll tell you,
they're not good at that. They don't have that mental
M's comment in the chat.
No.
And M's the Navajo Connection.
Oh, okay.
M's Native American, and she's hangs out on our show. But she's talking about the Navajo's connection with giants and the stories of that. So to me, those stories of the Native Americans here in the U.S. are way more credible, and the accounts from their oral traditions than any,
Smithsonian
guy in the 1800s is teaching a course, for the next 150 years of what they think happened.
Right. Well, I was going to ask her that from going from the Aruban giants. I know I saw photos on one of your social media of you at Easter Island with the Moai statues. And have you seen not only in Aruba, but have you gone other places? And we've talked about some of your friends in the same kind of sphere of influence of, getting into giants. You've researched elsewhere, I would assume, as well, right? Do you find these kind of similar themes from Aruba to these other locations of kind of the stature of them, the habits of the giants, the oral legend, as Mike's kind of referring to as well, of
how it lines up
right
a lot of other places.
They kind of tie back to each other.
Definitely. So when I traveled to Easter Island, I hired a private guide, and he was an archaeologist. So his parents actually were the ones who helped with the country of Japan design and create machinery to lift the moai that had been toppled due to a tsunami and put them back on their platform. They were so large and so heavy and so cumbersome that they actually had to invent machinery and bring it over in pieces in container ships from Japan and then put it together, hoping it would work to actually place these moai back on the ahu or the platform. So he was the son of the two archaeologists who did this. And so I asked him, how do you think then that the people put the moai on the platforms? And he said, the moai walk.
Yes.
So he is a guy who's an archaeologist. His parents are teachers in the university in Chile, in Santiago, at archaeology. They've been on PBS shows. They are, that's what they believed. Yeah. And he was a native Rapa Nuian. Mm-hmm. He and his parents, and he grew up there. And he said, no, they walked, and how they were activated, how they got the mana, which was the spirit, almost the intrinsic power that gave them the ability to walk, was when they had their eyes inserted. Mm-hmm. So the moai came to life when they had their eyes put into the statues, and the eyes were made of coral. So interestingly, I'll be posting about this on Easter. I'll be posting in detail about it on my Substack, about how coral and these ancient sites also are connected here in Aruba. I just came across a petroglyph site that I had been looking for about 20 years. And it's incredible, and it's very weird. And on the base of this petroglyph site are all these fossilized pieces of corals, sea fans and sea sponges that are all fossilized. So there's definitely, and all of the rituals that were done by the giants on these islands were done on limestone, and the limestone in this case are fossilized sea creatures, so former coral. So there's something with coral and this connection to some sort of ritual and, I believe, spiritual realm. And I think it is connected to the fact that the coral has a crystalline structure, that limestone has a crystalline structure, and that crystals hold all types of information. And there is a repeated reference of coral and these ancient sites, particularly in the islands territories, such as Rapa Nui and such as Aruba. So that was one theme that I found so intriguing, was this belief that coral actually brought the stones to life, and could very well maybe have been doing something similar in terms of an energy source here in Aruba. And also, there's that connection with the solstices and the equinoxes, the same things that, there are moai that just meet the four-handed moai. He greets the winter solstice sunrise. He's one of the handful of moai on the entire island that looks out into the water, towards the water. And he stands alone. It's very, very strange moai. It's inland, and seems his whole purpose is just to greet the sunrise on the winter solstice. And that's a global phenomenon, is this measurement of the solstices and the equinoxes and supermoons, and sometimes also Venus. And you have those sites here in Aruba too.
Man, that blows my mind. You can't get away from that. That you just find everywhere. Here in Ohio, we have a ton of limestone. So southern Ohio was a part of an ancient seabed. So you'll find a lot of sites, the Miamisburg Mound. Some people think that it was encased with limestone casing, and that the Miamisburg Mound was actually a pyramid. That there's remnants of a limestone mine that's just south of there, where they were pulling this stuff out and encasing mounds in Ohio with limestone. So
they knew something.
That's been
they knew what was
100% in line with what you see here. The Newark Holy Stone was actually pulled out of a mound that was encased in limestone. They took all of the stone to basically build I-70. One of the highways. They had to build up a berm. This thing was huge.
They took it apart to use it for material.
Well, there was clay encased. There's all these sand, clay. Then within the clay, they had this box that was made of wood. The box was all rotten out, and then within that was where they found the keystones that have the ancient Hebrew writing on them, and then another stone that's a box that has this the Decalogue stone, which tells the story of Moses' exodus from Egypt in a mound in Ohio that's encased with limestone.
Yeah.
Oh, but it's fake.
Yeah, it's another one of those that's not real.
The doctor and the Freemason that dug it up was interested in the lost tribes of Israel. So, he's trying to point all these conclusions, which is the big thing of why they say it's fake, because he was trying to fit this narrative that the Freemasons and a lot of people back then thought that Israelites had made their way here, ancient Jews had made their way here to America, which a lot of people did. The Vikings did. We know the Knights Templar was here. You see the cross,
you had a lot of
Templar
people,
cross all over the place.
Well, even to Tamil, even to the Turtle Island
Tamil
theory,
people,
and Orissa, Balu. I just wonder, what and where and how did these giants? They were not just in Aruba; they're in the Americas, they're in the South Americas, they're
everywhere.
What? Why?
You're shocked.
Why are they still? You would think.
How do we not have something?
Maybe even with the Homo floresiensis article, right? I don't know if you saw this or not. They, the people on these islands go, yeah, of course.
Island of Flores.
Homo floresiensis, this little tiny person, they're still here.
The Hobbit creature.
We see them. They live here. They're alive yet. They didn't die off. And I wonder the same, or did giants kind of just slip away, and are they,
That's
reclusive?
What she was saying earlier. Yeah, they just kind of, their culture and their line just kind of petered out, and
You'd think there may be some left.
But here's the problem I
Stragglers.
have is the history that she's digging up to find all this evidence and to find these connections with limestone in Ohio, limestone in Aruba. I mean, they're using the same building materials. It's resonating. You know, if you look into
conductor, right? It's a power conductor.
Crystalline material.
Well, they look at ultrasound machines are made with, quartz crystals.
Mm-hmm.
The piezo effect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a root in modern medicine with it. So why wouldn't there be an ability that, again? But people just think that things like this can't be real. Yep. Just because it's not taught about. It's not talked about.
We actually have. She's talking about these alignments.
This is one of her photos.
This is a recent post from Heather's Facebook post.
Oh wow!
And we can have Heather kind of walk us through these images, but we're obsessed with archaeoastronomy on this show. I don't understand it a lot, but this stuff fascinates me. And again, once you get into this giants world and these kind of things like Heather's doing, she's going down this line. Eventually you discover archaeoastronomy. Happened to Ross Hamilton, happened to Jeffrey Wilson, happened to Tom, happens to the Dowsers that visit Serpent Mound, that all of a sudden now
there's too many for them to be a coincidence.
Yeah,
there's
Dr. Kim Malville and Chaco
they just
Canyon.
must have gotten lucky.
Right.
No, come on. We can give not just give some, we can give credit to a time and a civilization and culture that we deem lesser because they didn't have iPhones and, they didn't have cities and cars. Or, they had cities, but they didn't have, skyscrapers and what have you. But we are not good. We're not good at going back in time and saying, oh gosh, I can definitely imagine being in the Old West. We can't go back that far. We don't like to give credit to older civilizations and say they probably knew way more than we knew. They're setting up all of these earthworks and effigy mounds and sites and
ancient stone
statues
structures
on Easter Island that point in bizarre directions that don't go with any of the other statues. There's a reason for it. It's not by happenstance. It's not by chance. It's not luck. We need to give all the credit due to those kind of places.
I agree. Heather, you want to walk us through this first image? This is kind of the before image.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so I had been looking at this image for about 20 years. I actually used to live not far from this megalithic stone site called Io Rock Formation. As a matter of fact, in the tour books, you'll find they're often described as looking like a giant's playground, which is interesting terminology. And whenever I see that terminology referencing these sites, these ancient sites, I always think there's a connection into a deeper reality. So I always knew that there had to be a purpose for this. The whole appears to be worked. This is a massive monolith of diorite. And the entire site is diorite. Not far from this is an actually very intriguing petroglyph panel that now, as I'm connecting it with other sites very close to it, I think it's telling the story of what goes on at this site in terms of these megaliths and monoliths and the different celestial events. So I was able to get to this site before sunrise on the spring equinox and realized that this is a spring equinox sunrise marker. So the hole is the area at which the sun will clear the hills in the distance, which you can't see from this angle from that photo. But the ancient people, they knew that there were hills and that even though the sun had risen, it had to clear those hills in order to hit at the right angle to go through that hole. And that's exactly what happens at that moment. So the sun beams right through that hole. And from one side, the entire monolith almost looks like a bat. And from the other side, it's almost got two faces. It's very strange. It's clearly, see, this is when I think it looks kind of like a bat. which is very strange. So this is when now the sun has moved. So first it goes through the hole, and then it moves up into this other cutout that's made, this U-shaped cutout, and then it reaches through there, and then it will disappear into the sky. So it's marking specific hours of the sunrise event occurring on the spring equinox, which is very bizarre. It also has at its base, which is again a globally seen phenomena of a stone chair cut out into the monolith in order to properly orient the viewer to witness the event. And I had done documenting of stone chairs to witness these celestial events in a couple of my posts you'll find on Facebook, and that could be a whole other series of research that you could go down for the rest of your life.
Wow,
that's incredible.
This site. I was so excited I couldn't believe it, because in the winter solstice sunrise, almost adjacent to this is a balanced stone, a dolmen that I never had seen before, except for that morning, which was so incredible. And it is also a marker that marks the winter solstice sunrise, and also accounts for the hills in the distance, obscuring the view until a certain time when the sun can directly go through that hole. But this was the newest discovery that I made on the spring equinox, which is it was truly incredible. I was so
That's incredible. Good for you, Heather. Wow, this is super
happy
important.
to finally get to see it. I always had a hunch. Yes, it is. And it just shows again this global connection between what was going on here at least 7,000 years ago and what was going on globally, the same obsession with tracking these celestial events.
Right. I mean, it really is incredible. And this is kind
pretty
of
accurate there. Jeez,
that's another where now it's in like what she was saying.
So that's the point at which it finally reaches above the hills, the sun.
Right.
And then that's when they would be able to view it. So they clearly accounted for this. I mean, this was very specific. They knew that even though the sun had risen from this vantage point, you would not be able to see it until about 7:15, 7:18, around that time.
And you said this was a monolith of diorite?
Diorite's one of the hardest stones in the world.
I was just about to say, that's a labor of love.
Oh, that's so hard to carve
at that time.
Right. And how did they cut through it? I mean,
without breaking it too. Yeah, to make that.
And without breaking it. And this is not the only site where they've made holes they've made holes to make creatures there's a rock called Monkey Rock that they've made holes to make it look like a monkey. They've worked Aruba. The stone. This all in Aruba.
Yeah,
These are all in Aruba.
I'm going.
Yeah, so
it's happening.
So this is so they really they somehow knew how to get these holes in these stones. Maybe they were still liquid at that time. I don't know. I mean, maybe they were able to do something to liquefy it. Maybe they had some tool that we don't know of, or a stone they were able to work to get through this. I don't know how they did it, but and just the entire cutout even above that was also worked. So they were able to do this in such a way, as well as the chair. They worked the chair too. So it's I don't know if it's
well, you know how out Sacsayhuaman and in Cusco, and they have all these really massive stone that literally look like they were poured into place. You can't even fit a human hair or a piece of paper in between them. They look like they were molded in these jigsaw puzzle ways. It's in Egypt. You find them. They look like almost like the diorite was melted and then poured or formed somehow with some kind of sonic technology, or who the hell knows what they were doing. But it's similar stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we find footprints here too in Aruba in the diorite. So we have, I've been shown giant footprints in diorite.
Sorry.
I don't know if I have a picture.
I just blew
a picture of it. Yeah, I don't know if I have it on my Facebook, but for sure I'll be putting it up again on Substack.
How do they explain that? Getting the footprint
well,
in?
you know that one in South America with Michael Tellinger?
You're right. Like
that giant Michael Tellinger's footprint, but that's sideways. It's weird because it's
this is a big footprint, right? It's not a
it's a big footprint.
So are these giants like that's walking over coals for them? You know, the lava flow comes out and they're like, "Get going, Ted." You know, it's your turn.
That's what I'm thinking. I mean, are they walking on hot lava? I mean,
it's a rite of passage, you know? Yeah, maybe that's...
I cannot figure out how they did it. I don't know if they carved it or if it's their actual footprint. And where they are, there's one whole stone not far from where I am. It's thank goodness it's a protected site. I mean, protected in that no one really knows about it except the people who lived in Aruba, grew up in Aruba, and that's who actually showed me the site. It's on a huge diorite stone that's almost flat at the top, which is actually kind of odd in and of itself.
Is it
and there are a bunch of footprints.
Is it this one here?
No, that's the same stone though. That's
just
the same
that's one
stone
we just looked at
from the other side.
Yes, from the other side.
Look at that.
So that's the carved on the bottom, the both of them, but the smaller one on the bottom where it clears the hills, and then the notch on the top.
Right.
How it's
so
drilled.
that, and if you look closely at that, which I've zoomed in, it looks like a face on the bottom. So it almost looks like two eyes, and one of those eyes is a hole.
Oh yeah.
And the seat is like the mouth. So that's where you would sit and you would witness that sun coming in and going into the hole.
That's
This is too crazy.
And that's diorite?
Interesting. And that's diorite.
Bro, that is such a hard
Does
stone.
anybody else know about this or go to this place and know about this alignment?
Well, no one knows about it until I discovered it. And then I just actually last night met with the head of archaeology at the Archaeology Museum.
Oh, wow.
And I told him, I said, I want to share with you what I discovered over at Io Rock Formation. So
you're Indiana Jones.
Hold on.
You're
this
really,
is breaking news.
That's what
for
I'm
our
saying.
show.
I've never done this. That's like Indiana Jones type stuff. That's awesome. This is amazing. So cool. So what did he say when you brought that to him?
Wow.
Well, of course, he's always, I think always skeptical, always pushing back.
Yeah.
But he knows that I'm, I come with the goods. I come with being that.
Come with
experiencing
receipts.
it. Right. Yes. And coming not just, I think, or I looked on Google. No, I'm actually going. I'm waking up at 5 a.m. I'm going to the site.
You're there when it happened. Right.
Exactly. And so he knows that I actually do the work. So he respects it. And he was shocked about it. And he was also shocked about the winter solstice alignment. And he knows that there is a global phenomena of the ancient cultures documenting these celestial events, and that it would make sense that Aruba would be part of it. So, he was intrigued, and I showed him the pictures. So he incorporates some of my work actually in his lectures now, which is
so cool.
Quite impressive.
Congratulations! I'm
thank you.
Speechless.
Breaking news,
so cool.
Everybody.
I was going to say too, with the alignments, there probably is a compendium of all the different locations and different cultures and tribes and peoples of the times that were building these sites that were celestially aligned. I'm sure there is, and that's probably a lengthy book. I have to ask, because anytime that we have a guest that goes down this road, have you heard of Michael Cremo?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's all. That's all I got to go with. Mike knows that I could be a fire hydrant of Michael Cremo, and so I try not to. But I find him endlessly interesting because of his stance that he says, I'm just taking the data that actual geologists and archaeologists and anthropologists and whatever scientist of the day and age found, and got ostracized because they were saying, I found something that's 200,000, 2 million to 6 million years. He just has so many examples where it's so unbelievable. And he's kind of the first introduction I had to the knowledge filtration system of how he talks about it. It doesn't get accepted. And so he's like, it's outlier information that it's real, but they just don't put it within that, that scope that everybody sees. So when you start talking about it, people go, you're crazy. And you're like, no, this is real. Like, it's so frustrating to say it is real. And, it's cross-referenced. And, kind of the interesting ones are when, say, an archaeologist digs something up or an anthropologist, and they take it to a geologist that they study it and go, yeah, from my study, based on the rock and strata, your item is 600,000 years old. And then everybody goes, that can't work out.
Whoa. Hold on now.
So a lot of people get ostracized, and you get people that get their careers ruined. And it's kind of the whole, not mentioning giants or Bigfoot or anything that, can discredit you. So a lot of people walk that fine line. So there have to have been discoveries as well where people just like, I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
And they won't.
Bury it.
They won't.
Don't talk about it. There's got to be a lot of that happens like in underground of archaeology.
Well, even one of the archaeological reports and all my information about the giants and their skeletal remains I obtained from the archaeological record. So this one, the largest skull ever found thus far was in these caves called Hato in Curaçao, and it was over a foot long, and it was found in 1904 by a German a researcher who actually specialized in elongated skulls. So this was his thing. So he found the skulls. He saw the skull firsthand. He was actually tipped off about it from a local person in Curaçao, and he was given the skull. He took the measurements and did an entire report on it. And then later, in the 1950s, archaeologists revisited his analysis of the skull that he actually saw firsthand. These later archaeologists did not see the skull firsthand, and archaeologists said, well, his measurements must be wrong because these are too big and it doesn't fit in with all the other things that we propose were going on in the 5,000 years ago on the island. So we're going to change his numbers. And they literally change his numbers. And this goes on a lot in archaeology, where later archaeologists will look at what someone who actually had firsthand knowledge wrote down and measured, and then it's just changed and contorted to suit whatever the agenda is of the next group of investigators. And this is where the knowledge gets all blurry and clouded and forgotten and just shelved. Because if I had only seen that first report, which actually I think is how I found the original report, I actually had to bribe this woman in a library at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands to take screenshots and send me an email of this, because there's only one place you can find this archaeological report from 1904 of the initial analysis of the largest skull. And I was able to get her to send it to me, which was so great because I have that research.
Why did she not want to?
Because it's a university library, and you have to be a student or a professor. And interestingly, a lot of the archaeological reports I do obtain about the giants from the analysis here on the islands are from university medical libraries, which is quite interesting. So the medical community does look at these giants as anomalies of humans. So it's interesting that they would, because if they're placed in medical libraries, which you would think is based solely on science, and then yet you bring up giants and then people tell you you're crazy, it doesn't make sense. You can't have it both ways. It can't be scientifically found in science libraries, and then when you report on what is found in the science library in the scientific record, that's not true. Well, I mean, which one is it?
Right. We have a conflicting information there.
Jeff always talks about multidisciplinary work where you have medical people studying it, anthropologists, archaeologists, astronomers,
more than one
geologists,
set of eyes on it.
Where you have these medical physicians, trained people telling you these are the measurements. This is what we found.
Right.
They're not an archaeologist saying, well, I'm going to hypothesize that, because, there just wasn't people back then that were this big, or there wasn't an ancient civilization.
It's a
15,000 years ago.
It's a theory.
So this
than
can't possibly be that old, because there's no culture that was ever that old. And then you have Göbekli Tepe. Well, it's like, well, actually, there is a culture that's that old, and here it is, and we have the proof. But they still don't budge. The dating of human beings keeps getting pushed back. Now it's like, what, 1 million some years of Homo sapien being discovered all the time. Why wouldn't civilization be pushed back with that as well?
There's a joke that, like, you measure the progress in science communities by headstones, because, like, you have to get somebody off their theory. You have to get whoever's ruling mentality or archetype of thought. You have to wait until
some young guy coming in.
Either you need somebody to come in to blow them out the door and be able to disrupt the chain of command, or you have to wait until they get out.
Right now, you have
a little bit of turning over.
Abraham Ibram, an Egyptologist. Those guys are kind of coming up and going, we're not putting up with this anymore, Zahi Hawass. We're not putting up with this closed-minded.
Well, with the new tunnel found too, and the different
they need
scans
to just
they're using.
Give it up.
It's the
just
slowest.
Give up the data. I'm so sick of it. You have it. You've been sitting on it for 3 years. Nobody knows what's in there. Of course you do.
You know who they're going to have
Stop
reveal
hiding.
it? Do you know? I heard they're going to have Geraldo Rivera reveal it.
Stop. You're joking. That's a joke. I know you're kidding. Anyways, small derailment, Heather. We do that from time to time. No biggie.
I think I got him a little bit with that.
I would love for you to meet our friend Jeffrey Wilson in a very similar situation that you're running into as he's digging in, because he's got the receipts. All right. He is going back into not just newspaper accounts.
Theorize.
No. He's got
the facts and receipts.
The Peabody Museum, for example, at Harvard. The Peabody Museum is what contains all the artifacts from the Serpent Mound from Ohio. Are there any artifacts from Serpent Mound in Ohio that we can go see? No, because they're at a Harvard museum. So Jeffrey took years and researched every piece that they took from Serpent Mound.
And he took photos of all of it.
And got all of the data, all of the writings, all of the photos, all of the scans.
Yep.
And found a postcard of a 7-foot giant, about a 7-foot giant skeleton mentioned in this old postcard. So, he's digging in, trying to talk to Ohio History Connection. Well, do you have the data on all the other skeletons that were found with this from this mound? And they're telling him, well, no, we only measured the one skeleton. He's like, didn't you think to measure the other skeletons?
There's more than one.
To compare. So what he had to do was essentially measure an artifact that was found in the same area, in the same mound, and then essentially made a scale from this one spearhead.
Yeah.
And then was able to
compare it to the size of the skeleton in the
postcard. Size of the skeleton, and found out that it's over 7 feet tall.
Yeah.
But I mean, he tried to
find
the record from Ohio History Connection. It could have been so simple for him to find that.
It seems purposeful, and I think a lot of people back in that time, you bought the land, you had a mound, you just dug it up.
Well,
you
that
kept
was
it,
Harvard.
you sold it, you had a collection. That
was Harvard, though.
But even beyond Harvard, though, I'm saying, like, yeah, they had it, but maybe they're not as forthcoming with it. Obviously, we can't see a lot of the things or anything really brought out of Serpent Mound. I don't know of anything.
Putnam grabbed it all and brought it back to Harvard. Now it's in the Peabody Museum.
But think of all the things in private collections too.
There's
probably somebody with a game room where you walk in to play billiards and they've got like a 30-foot tall skeleton. Everywhere. You're like, sweet Jesus, where did you get that thing, Jeff?
Billionaire.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe what that cost me.
But, Heather, it's just over and over again. We hear these stories from people and researchers like yourself, and it just for me, it just solidifies over and over and over again that something's being hidden. History is not what it seems. With the Aruban Giants, the Ohio Giants, the Kentucky Giants, the West Virginia, the list goes on and on. I mean,
the Kandahar
Giants.
Right.
I mean, we actually have one more, the image, and I don't know if this is a different site.
It looks different.
But this is from your Facebook page as well. But this looks like a completely new monolith here.
It looks kind of like a bear.
Yes. Yeah, so this was another discovery I made the same morning. So 15 minutes before, yes, it looks like a bear. So and I almost thought it also kind of looks like a bat in a way with its wings down, and that being the head. So, but I always felt it looked like a bear too, but there were no bears so far. The archaeological record shows there were no bears, but it could maybe relate to a constellation. You never really know, but that's more detail I'll have to uncover. But 15 minutes prior to the other monolith having this event with the spring equinox sunrise going through the hole, the sun, as it rises again and has to clear a series of hills, and again the ancient people accounted for it, as the sun rises it will come and touch the tip of the nose of this monolith, and after it touches the tip of this nose, then you can go to the other site and witness the sun going through the hole. So I believe these two monoliths, that's it. So that's where it happens. So the sun just taps the nose and then rises up and then goes over to the hills. And at that moment, when it hits the other set of hills is when the sun goes through that hole in the other monolith that we just saw.
So crazy.
So these sites are connected, I believe. I've always believed. As a matter of fact, it's 1.61 miles from this site to the site we saw with the hole. From the site we saw with the hole, it's 1.6 miles back to here. So there's a correlation between how far away the distance is between these two, as well as when I told you about the caves. So the caves are 3.85 miles from here. If you connect it all, it becomes a perfect isosceles triangle.
Oh.
Shut the front door.
Imagine that.
What? Yes. Isosceles triangles the giants were obsessed with isosceles triangles. They so these sites create an isosceles triangle. The instance of this occurring by chance is 0.0001%.
Wow.
So this, I believed, was deliberate. I think these sites are connected, and the giants, I know they were obsessed with isosceles triangles because that's how they buried their dead. So in the largest cemetery here, Malmuk Cemetery, you'll find the burials repeatedly show isosceles triangles, with the giants being buried at the angle parts, and then the lines of the triangle having average statured people.
Wow.
This is so wild.
And so they keep repeating isosceles triangles. It's just crazy. And along the lines of this isosceles triangle that's created by this site are petroglyph panels that run from the northwest to the southeast, repeatedly intersecting the island and intersecting all of the angles of the isosceles triangles. There's more isosceles triangles created on the island through these megalithic sites, but this is the most prominent.
And if you guys go to Heather's Facebook page, you can actually see that petroglyph. I apologize. I thought I had that downloaded.
Oh, okay.
Of the petroglyph where she's talking about these little triangles.
Right. It's not.
But if you go to her Facebook page, the very last post, like this is so recent. I believe this was yesterday when you posted this, but that image is in there.
Fresh.
But go check that out, because I now that you're saying that, I was wondering what that image was. My apologies for not putting it in here, but it's really compelling.
That image is called the twins. So that's people think, and the local story goes, that petroglyph is called the twins. It's a very large petroglyph. I also have a picture of me, not maybe in that post, but another post of me sitting next to it. It's almost impossible to get to. And I'm sitting next to it for scale to show you how large that petroglyph is. But that petroglyph is found in between this site and the other site with the hole. So I'm wondering if there's a correlation between these two monoliths being almost like twins, and then the twins petroglyph showing up between the two of them.
Sure.
So that's another avenue that I'm going to research further.
Wow, you're going to uncover. You still have work to do. I mean, there's a lot of things that are lining up. Yeah,
he's like, quit talking to us. Go find more stuff.
Yeah, and will you please let us know when you've dug into.
I'm so excited.
Even more and more information coming.
And I'm sure this, like she's saying, it's pretty recent discovery. Like talking to, I think you said the professor or head of a museum about your findings and trying to relay that information. So it's still early on in this process.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
right.
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Start, we go to do our Strange Happenings, which is our kind of weekly news of, kind of outlier news topics when we find, a lot of archaeology and things of this nature with, celestial alignments that we'll put on. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, hey, we know the lady that actually cracked that nugget, that's cool. Yeah. That's what's so wild. Now, in this direction that they're running, so it's 1.6 miles that direction to the other stone that we saw. Is there any more stones this direction, 1.6 miles, continuing on in that line? Did you go further out and see if there was anything else?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, there are. So, as a matter of fact, this stone here is part of the Kasabari rock formation, which has an enormous monolith. It almost looks like a mound made of tonalite. This is actually made of tonalite too, which is a form of diorite, a different color, just because of the different percentages of some of the components of the stone. But the monolith of Kasabari, the actual, and that's also on my Facebook page. If you look it up, it actually stares out at another place that I can look at through my window, which is called Heuberg, which is an extinct caldera. So the monolith of Kasabari rock formation is exactly 1/2 the size of Heuberg. So I think Kasabari rock formation was completely worked, and that these stones may have been there, but then they were worked to accommodate some sort of something that was going on, not only monitoring time, but distance, but also along those lines that I mentioned of the isosceles triangle, there are also balanced stones. And I have entire posts on all the balanced stones I've found so far in Aruba. It used to be 9, but now I'm up to 13. I've also shared that information with the Archaeology Museum, and now they incorporate that information in their research as well. And when they do lectures,
that's awesome.
About there being balanced stones here, because these stones are massive monoliths. They are not connected to the stone beneath them. They are pointing in certain directions, and they all kind of touch these lines of the isosceles triangles. And the balanced stones run in the same direction and along the same axis as the petroglyph sites. So all these sites are connected. And I also have a map of the fault lines of Aruba, and all of these sites also kind of correlate with the fault lines.
Yeah, we're talking ley line energy systems running through here. They're tracking it all. I mean, the balance stones have always been a point of reference for ley lines. Like when you go across seas in Europe, whether it's like in France, they have those, what are they called? There's just big upright standing stones. And it's pulling energy to these kind of larger structures. In the Northeast, you see dolmens and balancing stones here in America. They're markers, and they're pulling energy or anchoring energy in some way. But I see the cryptid huntress popped in. Maybe we'll have her do a remote view into the ancient past of Aruba.
I actually need my view changed. I'm still looking at the picture of this. Yeah, there we go. I was trying hard not to look at the center screen because I was like, I can't see anything.
We got a lot of screens in here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stoner.
It's like a small spaceship here. There are screens all around here. I'm always blown away when there's already the mystery of the giants. And then that mystery just keeps unfolding like this lotus flower.
Oh my God, it never ends.
Unknown, right? It's just like, but there's also these petroglyphs, and there's also these dolmens, and then there's these bouncing rocks, and then there's these celestial. It's like
ley lines.
What? There's a lot more to this story than just giants.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot happening under the hood down in Aruba, and to a greater extent, everywhere. And that's what, you know, it's kind of like the whole phenomenon, not to say I don't want to come visit, but, you know, people think I need to go to Hawaii or I need to go somewhere far away, you know, New Zealand, Australia, whatever. It's like, no, you can explore your own backyard, your own city, your own town. There are places you probably haven't gone to. That was, you know, a very common thing when I lived in California for a short period of time. A lot of people that lived there would say, "What are you doing this weekend?" I'd say, "Oh, we're going to Big Sur," and they would go, "What's that?" And I was like, "What? You live?" You know, just that lack of our own knowledge within our own space. Mike's brought me up to speed in, you know, the last decade, I would say, on even just Serpent Mound and the mounds of Ohio and the mounds of the U.S. And
I mean, I had been to Chichen Itza, Chaco Canyon.
Yeah.
I had been to multiple big time ancient sites before I ever realized that we had insanely advanced structures in my own backyard that I had never heard about.
Right.
Newark Earthworks being one of them.
That's when your mind kind of just exploded.
Like, I hadn't been to Serpent Mound until after I went to Chichen Itza.
Like, that's what I'm saying.
It's 2 hours away. We never went there. We never went there on a field trip when we were kids.
Right.
We never learned about it in history class.
So you had kind of a similar experience.
I was shocked.
To VJ. VJ, when he came over to the U.S. from India, was not on the path he's on now.
He didn't think.
When he came here and looked at some of the structures, though, he started to see similarities and patterns.
Hindu temples.
Right.
Yeah.
So he got awoken when he came here and was like, wait, what's happening?
Yeah,
I've seen this.
Serpent Mound's a Shiva temple.
Started firing him up. So same with Mike. Mike's going, you know, I want to go see all this stuff. And then to realize it's right here too, you start to have these connection points where you go, I thought I had to travel so far to get to this ancient. No, it's
right there.
It's everywhere. We just got to dig a little further and we'll probably find something in there.
Yeah.
Down in Miami right now, you know, they're digging up some site because they were building a new construct or apartments or whatever it was.
Yep.
And a guy I follow on Twitter went down there and he does all this traveling to just document all this stuff, and he loves archaeology. And he's like, you know, this is incredible. And it's like, again, right in our own backyard.
Well, I mean, perfect example. We were just in Sedona, kind of going to petroglyph sites, going on hikes, hanging out, not expecting to find anything that would completely blow. I mean, petroglyphs are amazing, but we've been to a lot of petroglyph sites.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few.
We've been, you know, around a little bit in the American Southwest, and have seen a lot. To find out that in the gift shop of the V-Bar-V Heritage Site, they have photographs and started documenting the serpent petroglyph at V-Bar-V and how it's a solstice marker and equinox marker. And there's 7 bends in the serpent.
Right.
There's also 7 bends in the Ohio Serpent Mound. So I go on to ask the ranger, hey, have you ever heard of the Ohio Serpent Mound? No, I've never heard of that. What's that? I was like, well, you guys have a serpent here that is the petroglyph that is tracking the solstice and equinoxes with shadow play on the wall.
Oh.
And we go through and take this whole tour where the park ranger's telling us about, and then this is just all within the last year. We found out that it's a calendar. I said, again, have you heard about Serpent Mound in Ohio? No, I've never heard of that. Well, it's one of the most advanced equinox solstice calendars. It's, you know, it's 18.6 year lunar calendar. We have another octagon in Ohio that tracks the 18.6 year lunar calendar as well. But Serpent Mound tracks everything. It's one of the few sites in the whole world that is a calendar system.
Yeah.
And they're using similar things like Heather's stone, this structure, where
with the limestone,
it's using the sun to, you know, basically point you in the direction of where, you know, the different parts of the year and so forth. But these rangers had never heard about any of this stuff.
No.
And they were shocked. I mean, totally blown away. We did a little video on it, and I brought the petroglyph to Jeff Wilson and said, hey, have you ever heard of this serpent petroglyph? He'd never heard about it.
And he knows a lot about
And he went through
Serpent
all
Mound.
these petroglyph books.
Yeah.
And it had never been put together that you have this serpent in V-Bar V Heritage Site. You have this Serpent Mound in Ohio that are doing the same thing.
Right.
With pre-Hopi people. It's just fascinating.
That's a wide breadth of communication of knowledge across expanse of land to do that distinctly
nobody
similar
had put it together.
of a concept, right? Well,
still haven't.
We're still,
we're connecting the dots,
right?
But
and you have all these technologies now. So you have all these scanning technologies that are looking over all the tablets and Sumerian tablets and cuneiform, and reading and interpreting those at what was it, like 95% accuracy?
Yeah.
To try to help with this,
wait till they start scanning Heather's, I think, stones and things that she's finding.
But I think that's the thing too, is there's such a large body of artifacts, knowledge, museums, research, disparate.
Much.
You're going to end up like Gandalf in the bowels of that tower, like reading little pieces of paper that are on papyrus. Because there's so much information, and again, even like in the Vatican and things like that, which they'll never let it out. But to compile all of this information, weave it together, because it can take lifetimes for people to dig through all of that. If we can just somehow speed up that process of taking the already known knowledge and information that's been archived, how do we advance that and speed that up to get a concise picture to where we can start making better determinations from just the literature? Where do we start? Where do we look?
It's people like Heather getting excited about this work,
absolutely,
and getting turned,
but to help her job out too,
yeah,
help her get in the right direction of this information. I want to compile it and I want to sort it this way so I can look in this direction. I do a lot with analytics, so I think of things in how do I speed up the process. How do you compile that quicker, get to what you want faster, and not have to sift through it. So it's more of taking that burden off of reading through this piece of information or that, because it might take a lifetime.
What's the most undeniable piece of information that you've come across that supports?
Good question.
What you're uncovering?
Well, the archaeological evidence of the skeletal remains of firsthand knowledge of the people who had seen these bones, had them in their hands, actually did the measurements, and then seeing the Bonaire skeleton, I think, as proof. Physical proof, as well as what Vespucci had documented, and calling the islands of the giants, and seeing the map and seeing the islands called the islands of the giants. It really makes that connection. Also, in terms of the archaeologists here, I have had many discussions with the head of archaeology here in Aruba about the giants, and he admits that there were giants here.
Okay.
And he said he fully believes that there were, but that because it's such a kind of taboo subject, and he doesn't want to in any way tarnish his credibility, he chooses not to even address it.
There you go.
So, which isn't helpful at all, and we butt heads and have many debates about, what exactly is his role. So when you look at the archaeological evidence, which is what allowed me to make the conclusion that there were giants on these islands based off of that archaeological evidence. And then once you determine that physically there is evidence that there were giants, then you start to look for the other connections that you see historically, traditionally with these sites, such as dolmens, such as megaliths and monoliths, and archaeoastronomy, and these connections with solstices and equinoxes and the petroglyph sites. And then you kind of find all those things. For example, another thing is giants love caves. I've seen this globally. They really love caves, and here in Aruba is no exception. In Bonaire, for example, Bonaire has the largest cave system of any of the Caribbean islands. They have over 400 of them.
Wow.
Here in Aruba, there are so many caves, and most of the giant remains and giant activities occurred within these caves. So that's another common denominator, that you find giants in caves. So giants and monoliths and megaliths, and that's again the same thing you're finding, and it's repeated globally. So if you can find the physical evidence and then look around and see, well, usually then you'll find balance stones or dolmen. And then you begin to find those, then you start to make these connections very soundly, and you're not speaking hysterically. You're actually putting together a story based on the evidence around you. And then also, I also add to it the stories of the people that the people tell me here in Aruba, and the people tell me in Bonaire and Curaçao about ancestors that they had who were giants. I think every now and then the genes come out, and I've met so many Arubans who say, "Oh, I had an uncle who was a giant. He was so big, his hands were so big, his jaw was so big, wow. He was so tall, he had to have all his clothes and all his shoes handmade." And you hear those stories too. And that's something that you also hear around areas where there were giant populations, these throwbacks to this genetic anomaly, which would be the anomaly at this time, but was normal back then. So if you put all that together, then you can come up with conclusions that are based on solid evidence. So I think the whole story kind of it tells itself once you begin to find the physical evidence.
Heather, why aren't they finding this? Why are the Heather L. Arnolds and the Jeffrey Wilsons? That's what blows my mind.
We're upset that you're finding it.
Not at all. But you've taken this path to become completely obsessed with this topic. But my whole thing is like, I'm a stoner researcher from Ohio that looks into a lot of things.
But this is Jeff's message of you've got to go do it yourself at certain levels, because it's not going to get done for you the way you want it done. That was his message, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what happens is you just you get the guy at the event that goes, don't look into giants. There's no giants. There's never been giants. You're going, what the hell? Okay, I'm going to look into giants.
They're just not putting the pieces together. They're not doing, like Jeffrey talking about how, over at Ohio History Connect, they don't look at these old documents. They're not looking into the archives and researching what people are saying back then. They just go off of what the narrative was and what they were taught in academia.
Absolutely. That's what she's saying.
They're not digging deeper into the receipts like Heather is. They don't have the ability to do this kind of research.
Once you get into the community, you're co-opted.
That's exactly correct.
You're beholden to it. You got a degree. You've got to toe the line.
And archaeologists, really, there are some that are in the field, but for a large majority of them, they're basically writing papers or pushing papers or moving one pile of papers from one side of their desk to the other side of their desk. They're not really doing the work, and they don't want to do the work. They don't want to get their hands dirty anymore. So, and when you really look at all the archaeological reports, you'll see it's just kind of copying something from someone else's archaeological report, putting it into yours, and then adding another couple of paragraphs. And now you put your name on it, and now you're one of the lead investigators. And it's kind of this cycle of almost elitism. And, me just tracking down these archaeological reports was brutal. It took me years to get all these archaeological reports. I think I'm only missing one or two.
Wow.
But I had to go and look in antique bookshops in Europe for some of these reports. I had to beg people to let me into the medical libraries because I wasn't a medical student. So I had to, bribe the woman at the University of Leiden to take a screenshot. So it's really difficult to get these reports.
I love it.
And the irony of it all is, particularly in the United States, a lot of these reports are taxpayer funded.
Yes.
And yet, so even though they're funded through public funds, the public can't have access to the information, and it's ridiculous. Infuriating.
It's ridiculous.
So you never find out the conclusions of what they've been doing, and because this information is completely cloistered. So even when I have discussions with the archaeologists here in Aruba, I'll mention something about one of the reports, and he doesn't even know what I'm talking about. So I think a lot of the times they're not even reading their own reports or reading the reports, or if they did it like one time back when they were studying.
But hey, you wrote a paper. Good for you. It got printed in some journal.
Well, that's what the game is. You're not accepted as successful in academia if you don't have papers published.
But that's requirements too.
Frustrating.
You have to be published. You need to get published this often, get tenure, whatever it is to
keep your to
again,
hold your position.
It's the Tommy
at
boy.
The university.
All you got is a guaranteed piece of shit.
Right. I could mark it guaranteed.
But it's and there have been other scientists and researchers that I've heard the line of thought against the research paper narrative too, of like when that came into play, the actual kind of grinding of the wheels of research and discovery that happened.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the purpose of it.
Is to slow it down.
Yeah. I can't remember what I was listening to.
You become, like she said, a paper pusher. You're pushing papers. Maybe you're not even writing your own papers.
If I walked into that job and they're like, hey, Justin, it reminds me of the Truman Show where he's like, I want to be like Magellan and discover things. And the lady pulls down the map. She's like, well, everything's been discovered. And he's like, if I walked into an archaeology role and they're like, yeah, you're just going to sit here and write papers and push papers, and I would leave right there and then. It reminds me of a story of like the smartest guy in his residency. The first day they went into the hospital and he saw what his actual doctor's life was going to be. He told his head chief instructor, he said, hey, I need to go use the restroom. He never came back.
Yeah.
He walked out and the guy told me this was like, he was like a savant and he was like, I can't do this.
Incredible people in academia, and I would never put a blanket term on everyone.
But what I'm saying is, if that was what my idea of, hey, I want to get into archaeology to dig up things, to move the needle, not to look at someone else's and then write my paper just so that whoever I have to write this paper for. But like, I don't like that kind of system. I want to do it for the reasons I want to do it.
Perfect example. Jeffrey Wilson is at a dig at Serpent Mound. Who's sifting through the dirt of the artifacts, of everything that they're pulling out of the dig? Jeff is sifting through
as a volunteer
to find
helper.
The artifacts. Why is he, a former guy that used to work for NASA and did LiDAR scanning for NASA, that just has an obsession with Serpent Mound and bought a property, moved in next door because he's so completely obsessed? Why is he digging through the dirt to sift through the artifacts, and then when they're done, no one rebuilds the serpent's tail? Guess who ends up rebuilding the tail? Jeffrey.
Yeah.
The volunteer from Friends of the Serpent Mound.
Took care of it.
So where's the archaeologist? Guess what? They're sitting in the air conditioner.
Yeah, he loves
They're sitting in the gift shop. In the air conditioning. He couldn't get them to come out and like, dude, why am I doing this?
Yeah. Picked a bad time of year to do it. It was that hot.
It frustrates the hell out of me.
People just don't care that much. Some people don't care that much. Some people do. And it's tough to get the right balance sometimes. And then you have
But they're not trailblazers. Heather's a trailblazer.
Right.
She's going into European archives and digging deeper than anybody.
I love it.
Heather, I would love your help getting in the archives of this small John Humerick House Museum here in Ohio. It contains the Newark Holy Stones. They're on display. Well, in the basement of that place, I've asked to be let down there to shoot or to see a couple of the original documents from when they found the artifact in that limestone mound I was telling you about. Well, nobody actually has ever seen those original reports. So there's the American Antiquity magazine wrote up a whole thing. They have Xerox copies of the American Antiquity of that magazine, and the original copy is in the basement. So I asked the lady, I said, hey, can I get down in that basement and check out? I can't really read this Xerox copy of this report.
What was her response?
Is it in the basement? She goes, oh, absolutely, it's down there. I said, wow, that's amazing. Can I get down there and see it? And she goes, absolutely not. I'm like, really? She goes, no. She looked at me like I was insane. And I'm like, why?
That's where the Wizard of Oz is hiding behind the curtain.
Honey,
that's where the answer
it would take an act of Congress for you to get down in that basement and see what you're asking to see. I'm like,
what are you putting down there?
Why?
What's down there?
That seems a bit overkill.
What do you got down there? E.T.?
Oh, yeah.
The wreckage of Roswell? Jesus. You got the smoking man down there playing a game of blackjack. What's going on in that basement?
She was almost offended that I asked her to go down in the basement to see these original documents. Like, offended. So I would love to sick Heather on it. Like, hey, she can find some way to get us down there, right, Heather?
I'll tell you what.
Yeah, of course. I've been in the basement of the Archaeology Museum here in Aruba, and it was sad, really, because you can't imagine how much is down in these basements.
I can't.
The real museum is in the basement.
100%.
Right.
It's like 1% of what they have in their possession is on display. And it's hand-picked things. For example, there's only one artifact of the giants in the Archaeology Museum here, and it's of a stone tool. And it indicates this is the largest stone tool ever found. And it stands out from all the other stone tools, which are of much later groups of people who are not giants at all, and actually came from the mainland of South America. Whereas the giants here, the scientists have no idea where the giants came from. It's as if they were always here. They didn't come from South America, or there's no real connection to any groups living outside of Aruba. Or Bonaire, Curaçao. So it's very, it stands out. But the interesting thing is, I know there are other giant artifacts in that basement, because one of my friends found one a couple of years ago outside one of the caves. And I told him, why don't you give it to the Archaeology Museum? And he did. And the archaeologist just put it in a shoebox and closed it and put it on a shelf. And so that's the other concern. Things aren't being categorized. They're not being put into any sort of categories and then cataloged.
I would never tell anybody of any museum or this or that I have it. I would never turn it in. I'm sorry, but I would find somebody like our friend that we know that takes care of items.
Jim Bowser.
Yeah. I would probably go that route or what have you, because that's my concern is there's so much there. I was just trying to think about, like, while you're talking about
the
how
dig
you
of Serpent
take care
Mound.
of it.
They dug up just to one pipeline to put in a water fountain in a restroom. They dug up, like, I don't know, 100,000 artifacts.
Right.
No one has ever seen those artifacts.
Not a single one.
They're sitting in a box. In the 90s, a research student, an archaeology student, wrote a paper about these artifacts.
Only documentation
and basically said, in her paper, why am I doing this? Why am I cataloging? That was her whole thesis.
That was the parallel to Jeff building the tail.
Am I? Yes.
That was the parallel to Jeff was like, and I started to feel like this research writer where I'm building the tail going, oh my God, I'm that person at this moment. I'm the person that shouldn't be doing this, but why the hell am I doing this?
Yeah. And she's an undergrad student doing cataloging these incredible artifacts.
You know, it would be great.
That no one at the top of American archaeology gave a damn about. And that's what pisses me off.
You know, it'd be great if we could take this, we could scan these artifacts and items in real time now. So taking modern technology to solve these problems, how do we put it so we can display all this? So you don't go to the museum and just see one giant artifact. How do I see that? So let's digitize this, scan it, put it into where you can get your VR. You can visit the museum.
Undeniable then.
And all of that information is put on there. And you can go to the giant category and scroll through everything. You can walk through the museum. You can take it all in. It would be real scale size for that. You know, that's the only way I can think of to because how do you physically put that much out? Yeah, you know, if the collections are hundreds of thousands of items for all of these, because think about all of the stuff you have in your own house.
They don't
just
want
everything
people to be
you
able to
own, every
research
item.
and get into those then if you made all that information available, somebody would dig something incredible up.
Well,
and that's
again,
what they don't want.
Here's my
people
idealistic,
like Heather to make all these correlations.
Right. This is my idealistic approach.
I mean, she's working so hard to find, like Jeffrey. It really reminds me of that. It's like you're digging so deep,
needle
and so
in a haystack
hard.
over and over. Like it gets exhausting to be like, oh, it's great when you find it, but you're like, God, the next time I look at that haystack, it looks even bigger.
Yeah.
It's like, but if you've got that burning desire, this is why we still do what we're doing, and why we, do the podcast, and why we've, kept at it for. It's been a couple years, and then we brought it back online again. We're not giving up on it because it's a desire, it's a passion, it's a, something that same thing that you're doing with this. You've got a spark for it that is not going out anytime
undeniable.
Soon. And every time you get that reinforcement, it's like, oh yeah, I'm ready to go right. What's the next thing? And
is that what keeps you going,
wild.
Heather?
Yeah, I mean, it's every day is a new discovery.
Yeah.
So last week I went out on a couple of hikes. I haven't even posted anything about this yet. And I was taken to this very bizarre site, a monolith that is probably the most bizarre monolith I've ever seen. It's clearly worked. It's enormous. And then next to it is a face. And I've actually posted about the face. It's a face that looking up, and it's a woman's face, and you can see she kind of has hair, and she has a face, and she's looking up at the heavens. She is reminiscent of, I don't know if you've seen this face that was found in the jungle of Guatemala that has since sadly been destroyed due to war, but it's from the early 1900s, and it's very reminiscent. So, I mean, that was something I saw for the first time, and then this petroglyph panel, and then these alignments with the sun. So there's always something more to discover and uncover. So just when you think that maybe now I can go and focus my efforts on something else in another aspect, or there's always something more. And that's kind of why I moved down here, so I could continue the research and be here. And so when I come up with an idea as I'm writing or as I'm researching, I don't have to put it on a list of things to go check out next time I head down to Aruba. I'm here. So I can just do it. And it's funny, it's, even though I'm here, I keep forgetting that I'm here. So I keep like researching, and then I'm like, oh no, I wanted to see. I'm like, oh no, I could just go there. Like I'm here now,
That's awesome.
I'm so used to for 15 years sitting and making lists of places I want to see, and coming on a vacation where people are usually on the beach, and I'm like crawling through a cave with like with these cobwebs all over it. And I'll get on the plane back to New York, and I'm like, all these people like were on beaches, and I was in like caves. It's just
I know that feeling.
Incredible. Yeah. So it's I feel sometimes that the giants want me to tell the story. I feel like
Heck yeah.
Sometimes that's part of it too, that, someone should be telling their story. And since no one else on the islands is, at least in this complete fashion, then, it has to be me. So I'm glad that I'm doing it. And right now I'm also helping put together a new museum that's going to be opening on the southern part of this island. And it's going to be a history museum in Aruba's first capital, the original capital of Aruba, which was Savaneta. And in that museum will be a portion about the giants. So I'm going to be working on that. So that really motivates me as well.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Congratulations. That is amazing.
I'm gonna keep bugging you about that to see the progress on that. I want to see how that's going along.
Good.
That's awesome.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah.
We'll
so
be
I'm
following
excited
along.
about that.
Yeah.
We'll be following along with everything you're doing, because like I said, this is like breaking news stuff.
Yeah.
We haven't had anything that's this kind of immediate.
Breaking news and blowing your mind.
Yeah, my mind's blown. Like I'm not going to sleep tonight. Again, this is kind of a trend with our show. Lately, we've been on just a run of incredible conversations, incredible guests.
Yeah.
And honestly, Heather, you're adding to Giants researchers, Jim Vieira, Hugh Newman, Ross Hamilton, Jeffrey Wilson, these guys that we've
You're expanding the reading list for people to
that's the
peruse.
thing, is you have Europe, you have Aruba, you have the Stone Chambers, is Jim and his brother.
And with the etchings and the marks for, how many... conservatively, the theory that's for how many pregnancies and births, and just all the caves on the island. Like, it just seems like it's a perfect place, and kind of the dots are connecting.
She's got information that's adding to the story.
Well, it correlates so closely, and
it's so wild. It officially blown. My mind's blown.
Yeah,
like, because every time she talks about something, it's 10 things that I've looked into around here that is exactly the same story, the exact same way it unfolds.
Right.
It's the archaeoastronomy, it's the megaliths, it's the structures, the mounds, the earthworks, burial sites.
Yeah, we'll get there at some point.
Petroglyphs.
Some point, someone's going to grow up. They're going to infiltrate the Smithsonian. They're going to get to these museums. And
Jay from Cryptids of the Corn.
And they're going to do they are going to do somebody said it earlier in the chat, like a national treasure heist. And there's, we're going to, somebody's going to leak this information at some point.
Yeah. I think we're getting close to that. What do you think, Heather? Do you think there's somebody on the inside that's ready to just pop with this stuff?
Yeah, I think the problem with the Smithsonian, with all these museums, I used to really think, I think there's a concerted effort to keep things quiet. I think particularly about the giants. I think for a part of it, people used to say, it has to do with Darwinism. Well, if you read Darwin's works, which I have, Darwin talks about large-statured people. He talks about coming in contact with them and how they are giants, essentially. And he speaks specifically about the giants he came across in Patagonia and how he talks about them being of large stature. So it can't be about Darwinism. And Darwin wasn't that prolific where you would have to protect him in such a way. It doesn't even make sense. But I really think the effort deals more with the Bible, interestingly enough. And although I'm not a religious person on that level, I do think there is an effort to say that if we admit, we being the powers that be, that there were giants, then the Old Testament is accurate, because the Old Testament mentions a lot about the giants.
Oh, yeah.
And Goliath is one of the most famous of the giants.
Right.
So, so I think there's almost a good versus evil in a sense. Maybe there's a suppression of the truth so that as not to make the Bible look like a historically accurate document as well as a religious book.
It look more fantastical. Right.
That's what our friend Joel Thomas, who's been looking into the biblical side of giants and the Nephilim. He's a podcaster, musician. Kill the Mockingbirds is his podcast, but he's been going deep on the Nephilim, the biblical bloodlines of, going back to Noah, the book of Enoch, how the book of Enoch and these ancient texts tie in, and with the Watchers and who these beings were.
Right.
And like he's saying, as, from a Christian perspective, he's a Christian, fully comes out and says, I'm interested in this research from the biblical standpoint of, if all of this is true, like you said, they have to admit that, hey, there's some truth to these ancient stories.
And that the Bible might be more based in fact
than... The Hindu texts, all these texts, the Bible is coming from older sources, just like older source maps.
Sure.
And so a lot of cultures have this correct, whether it's Sumer,
a lot of cultures
Egypt,
have these fantastical stories of
the
flying machines or gods that have magical powers and weapons and and giants and Nephilim. It all
lines, dude. Right, Heather? I mean,
and in terms of the museums, I think a lot of them are just really disorganized.
Yeah,
and a lot of the artifacts, they don't even know what they have. From what I've seen in my experience with these museums, particularly their basements, they literally, I know an archaeologist who just stumbled across a skull and was trying to figure out, where does the skull belong to? There's not even any documentation attached to the skeletal remains. So I think it's a lot of sloppiness. And And if you let us see, I mean, again, tax dollars, a lot of times, particularly in the United States, are funding these centers, these museums, and to admit that how sloppy it is and how there's no built management of the artifacts,
no leadership,
or you got a Ted Bundy working there, and he's dropping off a random skull in the. Just getting rid of some evidence here.
It's just bizarre. I mean, how do you not have documentation attached to an ancient skull? It's just sad. I mean, really, all the work put into unearthing it, and what if it's the answer to some sort of question? Or it's really. I think that has a lot to do with it too. It's not only something that's maybe suppressed purposefully. But also it's just complete mayhem in these basements, and there's just complete incompetency.
What about the fact that you have people that purposefully buried members, even the Egyptians, we take out all these tombs and we're unwrapping them.
Intrusive burial.
If somebody was going around in the local cemetery in our hometown digging up graves, and it's a fine line. Like, when does that become okay? How long does time have to go?
1,000 years, 800 years.
We are, I guess, in the sense, there is some justification if you want to take it this route and say, we're trying to understand our history. We're not maybe digging it up to loot it as much as we are trying to understand the storyline. If we take it from that context, I can understand it. But when it gets kind of like you're saying, it's so sad. Like, you go through the trouble of burying this member, we dig them up later, and we're like, we already
toss
have
it in a
200,000.
shoebox.
Just throw, like, dude, I went through all this effort. My tribe, my culture, my people buried me. Like, you just disrupted my final resting place.
In a Skechers box.
I don't like being woken up in the morning, even after a good night's rest. Like, I don't want you to disturb my final resting place in that manner, and at least, not take any kind of care of me.
But is it underfunded? Like Jeffrey talks about how there's only a handful of archaeology positions in the Midwest.
It's not a growing field.
That are even studying Hopewell, Adena. These are old terms for the mound builders here in Ohio. The Hopewell, the Adena, the Fort Ancient cultures. There's like one guy in Indiana that's an expert on the Hopewell, and he's probably going to move on and go work for a museum or something. So you have
it's drying up,
undervalued, underappreciated in archaeology too, where they're not getting the funding. It's like, well, why would I go out here and dig into all these things if my work's not going to be presented? And so the field itself just gets fizzled out. And what he was saying was a lot of these like big high-end LiDAR companies are what we rely on for the research now. So it's not archaeologists going out. It's these, folks that have big, expensive equipment, sonar equipment, and they're getting the jobs to go out and do the research.
What
and
if
the
it's going to get privatized and we're not going to know about any of it?
That's what's happening, dude. That's what's happening here in Ohio.
So basically what happened with all of the mounds back in the day of somebody buying that land and looting it and whatever with the remains, and
those guys
that's going to happen
like,
again.
They were all private researchers and Freemasons. They were going around like antiquarians is what they call it.
So they're going to be all over South America going through the jungles and finding
people are
places.
doing it now.
Oh my gosh.
Heather's a modern day antiquarian.
I get that, but I'm saying she's not using like, Terminator level technology, flying black helicopters over things with LiDAR to find this. She's out there doing work.
All those companies that are scanning the Guatemalan jungle, that's some big company that's doing those scans.
So
that's not some university
privatizing the information of the world at this point.
I mean, that's what it's going to.
This is so weird.
But you still have your underground, boots on the ground folks doing the research, which hopefully
and that's appreciated that
we can bring those people to light more.
At this
than
point,
the big companies.
I understand Jeff's message and seeing her enthusiasm for it and kind of your own enthusiasm, how much you've studied and self-educated yourself, because I'm just more of like, I have, enough knowledge, but Mike really digs in and sinks his teeth into like wanting to understand it from a deeper perspective. I just kind of like to collectively get all of the information and get my gut feeling in check of like, if somebody's like giants, yes or no, I'm like, yes, I've heard enough. I've seen enough evidence. You know what I mean? Like I have to have that accumulation. If I have a doubt about a subject, then I want to hear somebody talk about that enough and not convince me, but give me enough information that my mind goes, yep, that bucket is filled up enough that I agree with you. And I think, at this stage,
I was in disbelief the first time I had heard about giant skeletons being found in Ohio.
Right.
Yeah, right. You're full of crap. Don't give me that. I would have known about this.
This would have been headline news.
I know more about weird shit than anybody I know, and I didn't know about this? Come on. This is crazy.
Well, stranger things have happened.
But, you kind of took that line of a little discovery, which is leading you to now you're really unfolding this huge mystery down in Aruba. And I can't thank you enough for your research.
Absolutely.
For real. Like, this is one of the best episodes we've done.
I had a blast. I was so stoked to do this one too.
Yeah.
I
knew it was going to be a banger too.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, this is the wheelhouse of the Strange Road.
Yeah.
But
this
Heather,
what we like to
I want
to
final thoughts from you. If there's anything else we need to be aware of, final thoughts, and then also where can we find your work? Where can we find you? How can people connect?
Yeah, so I'm just so thankful that you invited me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It's funny because just a year ago this month, it was just a dream to move down to Aruba, and then now I'm here. And my advice is something that you brought up earlier, Mike, is that just look around you, look around your backyard. When I lived in New York, an hour north of me were ancient megalithic chambers.
Yep.
And the huge dolmen that is on the picture for promoting tonight's show in North Salem, New York. If you see something and it looks strange, or you've always had a question about it, or some sort of intuitive feeling, just research it further, because just because you don't see it on the internet, it's not on Google, no one's written about it, and you haven't learned about it, it doesn't mean that that's not a discovery waiting to happen. And there are a lot of things like that. And that's how we're going to find things out, is where people just look around them. I respect a lot of people who do Google research, but not to the extent that you can't. For example, I can't speak about Easter Island the way I speak about it without being there, without seeing those moments. I can't talk about the caves here in the petroglyphs without seeing them and being there. And there's something about doing that. And you don't have to travel, really. That's the point. I mean, just look around where you are or where you can drive to. I'm sure if you have the mind for this, you already have a site in your head of what you want to investigate further, and to make the connections to other sites, because you don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Once you find one thing, for example, I found the giants, then, and they're in caves, and, there's petroglyphs. Oh, then maybe there's megaliths. There are megaliths. There are monoliths. There are archaeoastronomy correlations. So look at other research, and you can probably make those connections too. So, and then tell people about it. Make sure you tell people about it, because that's really, you want to add to our human story. And without telling people about it, you're just not adding to it at all. And becoming a mini Smithsonian, for example. So I just hope that people are inspired to do research and not have to feel that they have to travel or do anything exotic. There's no reason for that. Now, it's good to always travel, but to compare and contrast what you've seen, because that's something that has really afforded me an insight into researching these sites. But I do hope that people are inspired to research around their own homes and come up with new discoveries too. And I'm starting my Substack, heatherlarnold.substack.com. And that's where you're going to be finding all of my research in much more detail. So I'll be posting teasers on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, which I'm also found at Heather L. Arnold. But then I'll be going into much more elaborate detail on my Substack. The reason why I decided to do a Substack is because I think people can accept the information a little easier than having an entire book, or people seem to lose interest sometimes. And I think that in a blog form is a little bit more palatable to a lot of people, particularly it's a little quicker read, and it'll have photos and diagrams and everything wonderful. And just continue to follow me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome. Oh my God. That was incredible. I mean,
we might even have to just say we're gonna just, as you keep going with it, like when's the next time we're gonna put you through the ringer of interrogation,
honestly,
because it's gonna be like, what did she do now?
Substack, we can cover it on Strange Happenings.
Yep.
So we have where we
for that.
cover headlines, newspaper articles, articles on what's happening strange in the week. I mean, that's a Substack to pop in on and keep everybody up to date.
Absolutely.
Through Strange Happenings. So we can do that. And obviously we would love to have you on anytime in the future. If you would
door's always
ever
open.
want to come on our little show again, the door is always open, Heather.
Yeah.
I would love that. Thank you so much. I would love to be part of the show. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
This is a blast. And unbelievable.
The wind, thankfully, I think we had like maybe one little cutout.
No wind mishap. One tiny one. It was a blip.
I will take that as a win.
Well,
wind.
The Aruban giant gods are shining down and smiling upon us this evening.
I think so.
Am I wrong?
No, I think you're exactly right.
Well,
thank you again, Heather.
Yeah, Heather, thank you so much. Stay right there. We're going to outro the show. We're going to come back and chit chat with you and say goodbye properly. But for right now, we appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
All right. That was dope, dude.
That was.
I hope all you guys in the chat loved that episode, this episode, as much as we did. We saw the chat just
know it was going to get that deep.
I had a feeling.
I would put my galoshes on.
I like keeping you in the dark for that reason.
So I read enough
I can actually
to know
watch
enough.
your brain just start cracking and then exploding.
It was great. It was, like you said, not going to bed. Every night after a great show like that is like the night before Christmas as a kid, to where you're like, I'm going to catch Santa this year.
Yeah.
And you're just waiting on the presents. Like I used to sleep behind the Christmas tree to catch them. But I always fall asleep.
Poor mother.
So I'll fall asleep tonight at in the morning, like 2 or 3.
Yeah, we'll get to bed eventually. But thank you to everyone in the chat. We appreciate the hell out of you guys. Every time they bring it, they bring the heat.
They're awesome.
They're
awesome.
Stookie, I agree. Don't forget to love. Wonderful comment. All of you out there, we love you. We appreciate, we thank Heather again. Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're at The Strange Road. You can find us.
Check us out.
We're putting out clips and reels and shorts, and we've got episodes rolling out each week. If you guys want to really keep in contact with us, make sure you like and share this video if you like it.
Yeah. We're trying this new thing where, like, we don't know if people do the word of mouth as much, but if you've got somebody out there that enjoys this as well, give them a shout out.
Somebody that's into giants, share this video.
Show them how to hitchhike, to get over here.
That's right. And
come on over. And
if you aren't subscribed already,
we're close on some merch.
Yes,
we're close.
Yes.
We're trying.
And we are getting an e-commerce portal and some merch.
Saying they want hoodies and shirts and stuff, and we've heard you, and we're trying to get there. We want to get you some gear so you can represent the Strange Road in a great way, and hopefully strike up those conversations of people that usually ask us the same thing, like, "What the hell's the Strange Road?" And you go, "Well."
Yes.
And people usually go, "Yeah, I know what the Strange Road is." It's kind of like they recognize it after they get the terminology.
Really? I haven't met anybody that's recognized.
No, Agnihotra. Adam.
Oh, Adam?
He's like, so I guess you could say I've been on a strange road.
Oh,
that's how,
yeah.
So we've had people actually, relay it back to their own experiences. So some of the guests, but if you're out rocking the gear and somebody goes, "What's the Strange Road?" That's just the conversation starter of, well, hey, this is kind of how I got to it. And I think we all that have gravitated towards this show and towards this kind of like culture. Yeah, we have questions. That's why we're here. We know that we're not seeing the artifacts. We know we're not getting the official story.
We're gonna have people on
and
that
we're tired
have the
of
answers.
Not getting it. Yes.
And we're gonna have people on that have the answers.
Yeah.
And you guys can decide and do your own research.
Please do.
And, take
fact check me up.
Anything that our dumbasses says with a grain of salt. By the way, as well. But we're gonna end it there. This has been a great night.
Thank you,
we appreciate the hell out of all you guys.
Oh, and Stoner.
And we appreciate
Master Control.
Always Stoner, the loner.
Yeah.
all alone.
And even though he's not here in
all
spirit,
by himself in
Disbro,
Master Control.
But
Disbro, we know you're
back.
in your hotel room hanging out.
We know you're coming back.
And you know,
we missed you
we
this
appreciate your spirit and setting us up for success with all the audio.
He well oiled this machine so that we can just hit go.
Absolutely. And good night to all of you crazy fools in the chat.
Thank you.
We appreciate the hell out of you. Thank you guys so much. We are out. Drop that beat, sir.
Later.